Rain drummed against the restaurant windows like impatient fingers, creating a melancholic rhythm that echoed through the elegant dining room. Emily hesitated at the entrance, her soaked clothes contrasting brutally with the refined atmosphere. The maitre d' observed her with barely concealed disdain, his eyes scanning the prominent belly beneath her wet coat, the worn boots leaving small puddles on the polished marble. "May I help you?" The question carried more judgment than courtesy. Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling not just from the cold. She hadn't eaten a decent meal in 3 days. Shame burned in her cheeks, but hunger was stronger than wounded pride. "I need help." The words came out in a hoarse whisper. "I don't have money, but if you could give me something to eat, anything, I could work, wash dishes." The silence that followed was deafening. Other patrons turned their heads. Whispers of disapproval began spreading like invisible waves. Emily felt the world collapsing around her. Why had she thought this would work? Why had she humiliated herself this way? "Miss," the voice came from a table near the window. A man rose slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He was tall, with brown hair slightly graying at the temples, and blue eyes that carried a familiar sadness. "Please, sit with me." Edward Hawthorne had recognized something in the young woman's desperate expression, the same vulnerability he had felt in dark moments of his own life. Without waiting for an answer, he gestured to the chair across from him. Emily wavered. Her experience with strange men hadn't been positive, especially in her current condition. But there was something different about this man. His posture wasn't predatory. It was protective. "I don't accept charity," she murmured, though her feet were already carrying her toward the table. "It's not charity, it's company." Edward pulled out the chair for her, an old-fashioned gesture that surprised her. "I hate dining alone." The waiter appeared instantly, his attitude completely transformed in Edward's presence, clearly a regular and respected customer. "Bring the full menu," Edward instructed calmly, "and hot tea for the lady." Emily sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap. The tears she had held back for so long threatened to overflow. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to." Edward poured water into her glass, the gesture simple but kind. "We all need help sometimes." While they waited for food, Edward didn't pressure her with questions. Instead, he spoke softly about neutral things, the weather, the season, the city's gardens. His voice had a hypnotic quality that calmed Emily's frayed nerves. When the soup arrived, she had to control herself not to devour everything immediately. Edward pretended not to notice her desperate hunger, maintaining casual conversation while she ate. "I'm a farmer," he said eventually. "I have a property in Oxfordshire. It's not glamorous, but it's peaceful." Emily looked up, meeting his gentle gaze. "It must be beautiful." "It's isolated. Some people find it too lonely." There was a melancholy in his voice that she recognized immediately. After the meal, when Emily tried to get up to leave, Edward stopped her with a gentle gesture. "Where are you going now?" The simple question shattered her. Where would she go? The cold streets of London? Some overcrowded shelter where they'd question her about the child's father? I'll find a place." Edward studied her face for a long moment. He could see she was young, probably in her 20s, with disheveled blonde hair and green eyes that had already seen too much pain. There was a broken dignity about her that touched something deep in his long, dormant heart. "Come with me tonight," he said suddenly, "to the farm. You need a safe place, at least for one night." Emily stared at him with mixed suspicion and hope. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Edward smiled sadly. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, and because—" he hesitated, "because I know what it's like to feel completely alone in the world." The rain continued beating against the windows, but inside the restaurant, something had changed. Two wounded souls had found each other, and though neither knew it yet, this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. Emily nodded slowly, a single tear rolling down her cheek. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. The journey to Oxfordshire unfolded in contemplative silence. Emily watched through the car window as the urban landscape gradually gave way to rolling fields and sleeping villages. Edward drove with quiet concentration, occasionally pointing out regional landmarks. A medieval church, an old mill, hills that changed color as clouds passed overhead. "We're here," he announced softly when an imposing stone house emerged among the trees. The farm was larger than Emily had imagined. The main building, Victorian in style, rose majestically against the night sky, its illuminated windows creating a welcoming pattern on the dark facade. Well-tended gardens stretched in all directions, and she could make out the outlines of stables and other rural buildings in the distance. As they approached the front door, it opened before Edward could reach for his keys. A stern-looking woman in her 60s appeared, her grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, her sharp eyes immediately focusing on Emily with undisguised suspicion. "Mr. Hawthorne," the woman said curtly, "you didn't mention you were bringing a guest." "Mrs. Fletcher, this is Emily. She'll be staying in the blue guest room tonight." Edward's voice carried quiet authority, brooking no argument. The housekeeper's lips pressed into a thin line as she took in Emily's bedraggled appearance and obvious pregnancy. "Of course, sir. Shall I prepare something from the kitchen?" "Thank you, but we've already eaten." "Emily, this is Mrs. Fletcher. She manages the household." Edward helped Emily out of her damp coat. "She's been with the family for 20 years. Emily offered a tentative smile. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Fletcher." The older woman's expression didn't soften. "I'll show you to your room then." As they climbed the oak staircase, Emily couldn't help but notice the family portraits lining the walls. Edward appeared in several, but always alone or with much older relatives. There were no recent photos of a wife or children, which struck her as both sad and curious. The guest room was larger than any space Emily had lived in for months. A four-poster bed dominated the room, with crisp white linens and a thick quilt. A writing desk sat beneath tall windows that she imagined would offer beautiful views in daylight. Fresh flowers in a crystal vase added a feminine touch. "There are towels in the wardrobe, and extra blankets if you need them," Mrs. Fletcher said stiffly. "Breakfast is at 8, though I suppose you'll want to be on your way early." The pointed comment hung in the air like a challenge. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Edward appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Fletcher, please prepare the room for an extended stay. Emily is welcome here as long as she needs." The housekeeper's eyebrows shot up. "Extended stay? Sir, perhaps we should discuss—" "That will be all for tonight, Mrs. Fletcher. Thank you." After the housekeeper left with obvious reluctance, Edward turned to Emily with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry about that. She's protective of the household, but she means well." Emily sank into the chair by the window, suddenly exhausted. "You don't have to do this. I can leave in the morning." "Where would you go?" Edward asked gently, echoing her own thoughts. She had no answer. Her savings were gone. Her family had disowned her when they learned of her pregnancy, and the father of her child. She shuddered at the memory of their last encounter. "Stay," Edward said simply. "At least until you figure out your next step. The house is large enough, and frankly, it could use some life in it." Emily looked around the beautiful room, then at this strange, kind man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't dared voice. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, needing to understand. Edward was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "This house has been too quiet for too long. Maybe we can help each other." After he left, Emily sat in the window seat, looking out at the moonlit countryside. The silence was profound, but not empty. It was full of possibility. For the first time in months she felt safe. Her hand moved to her belly, where the baby stirred gently. "We might be okay here," she whispered to her unborn child. "At least for now." Outside, an owl called from the ancient oak trees, and Emily finally allowed herself to truly rest, cocooned in unexpected kindness and the promise of tomorrow. The morning brought weak autumn sunlight filtering through Emily's bedroom windows, illuminating a view that took her breath away. Rolling green fields stretched to distant hills, dotted with sheep and divided by ancient stone walls. A garden below her window burst with late-season roses and carefully tended herb plots. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, quickly smoothing her wrinkled clothes. Edward entered carrying a tea tray, his morning attire of worn corduroys and a cable-knit sweater, making him look younger somehow. "I thought you might prefer breakfast in your room today. Mrs. Fletcher can be intense in the mornings." Emily accepted the tea gratefully, noticing he'd included jam, toast, fresh fruit and scrambled eggs. More food than she'd seen in weeks. "You don't have to treat me like an invalid. I'm treating you like a guest." Edward settled into the chair across from her, his own teacup balanced perfectly. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." Emily hesitated, then added, "The bed is wonderful, but it's more than that. It's the quiet. In London there was always noise, traffic, shouting, sirens. Here I can actually hear myself think." Edward nodded, understanding immediately. "That's what drew me back here after university. My father wanted me to stay in London, work in finance like him. But the city felt like it was suffocating me." They sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the gentle clink of china and birdsong from the garden. Emily found herself studying Edward's profile as he gazed out the window. There was something deeply sad about him, a loneliness that matched her own. "What happened to your wife?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. She immediately flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. That was terribly rude. I saw the portraits downstairs and noticed she died 3 years ago." Edward's voice was matter-of-fact, but Emily caught the slight tremor in his hands as he set down his teacup. "Cancer. We'd been trying for children for years, and just when we thought we'd given up hope, she became pregnant. But the treatments—" He trailed off, lost in painful memory. Emily's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry." Sarah was excited about turning this place into a real family home. She had plans for every room, dreams of children running through the gardens, birthday parties in the conservatory. Edward's voice grew quieter. "After she died, I couldn't bring myself to change anything she'd arranged, but I also couldn't bear to live with all those empty dreams." The weight of shared grief settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Emily understood the ache of lost futures, the way hope could become a burden when it had nowhere to go. "What about you?" Edward asked gently. "The father of your baby?" Emily's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "He was my lecturer at university, Professor James Morrison. Married, of course, though he failed to mention that initially." The bitterness in her voice was sharp as winter air. "When I told him about the pregnancy, he accused me of trying to trap him, offered me money for an abortion, then threatened to ruin my academic career when I refused." Edward's jaw tightened. "He abandoned you completely. Worse, he had me thrown out of student housing, convinced the administration I was unstable, made sure I couldn't complete my degree." Emily's voice broke slightly. "I had nothing left. No family support, no friends who believed me over a respected professor, no money, nowhere to go." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding rather than pity. Edward didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances. Instead, he simply sat with her pain, acknowledging it without trying to fix it. "Would you like to see the gardens?" he asked eventually. "The greenhouse especially. Sarah designed it. She had remarkable instincts with plants." They spent the morning wandering through carefully planned spaces that showed years of loving attention. The greenhouse was particularly magical, filled with exotic orchids and climbing jasmine that perfumed the air. Emily found herself drawn to a section of empty planting beds. "What grew here?" she asked, running her fingers through the rich soil. "Sarah's cutting garden. She loved having fresh flowers throughout the house." Edward's voice carried fond sadness. "I haven't had the heart to plant anything since." Emily knelt beside the empty bed, imagining it filled with colour and life. Something stirred in her chest. Not quite hope, but something like it. Purpose, perhaps. Would you mind if I tried growing something here? I studied botany before. Everything fell apart. I know it sounds silly, but I think I need to create something beautiful." Edward studied her face, seeing a spark there that hadn't been present the night before. Sarah would have liked that idea very much. As they walked back to the house for lunch, Emily felt something shifting inside her. The grief and fear were still there, but they no longer consumed every thought. For the first time in months, she was thinking beyond mere survival. That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner in the warm kitchen rather than the formal dining room, their conversation flowed more easily. Edward told her about the farm's history, the challenges of maintaining old buildings, his plans for expanding the orchard. Emily found herself laughing at his dry observations about Mrs. Fletcher's ongoing war with the local rabbits. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was connection, the first real human warmth either had felt in far too long. As Emily prepared for bed, she realized she wasn't planning her escape anymore. Instead, she was thinking about what seeds she might plant in Sarah's empty garden and what flowers would bloom best in Oxfordshire soil. 3 weeks into her stay, Emily had established a gentle routine that surprised her with its contentment. She woke early, before even Mrs. Fletcher stirred, and made her way to the greenhouse with a cup of tea. The morning quiet became sacred time, filled with the whispered promises of seedlings and the therapeutic rhythm of tending growing things. Edward had driven to the village nursery at her request, returning with packets of seeds and small plants that made her eyes light up like a child's at Christmas. Cosmos and calendulas for cutting, sweet peas to climb the greenhouse walls, herbs that would make Mrs. Fletcher's cooking even more aromatic. Each planting felt like an act of faith in a future she was slowly beginning to believe in. "You have your grandmother's hands," Edward observed one morning, finding her transplanting delicate seedlings with infinite patience. He leaned against the greenhouse doorframe, coffee steaming in the crisp air. Emily looked up, dirt smudged on her cheek, her hair escaping from its ponytail. "My grandmother taught me that plants respond to intention. If you handle them with care and hope, they'll grow stronger." Sarah believed something similar. She used to say that gardens were where hope lived most purely. Edward stepped closer, studying the neat rows of emerging green. She would have loved seeing this space come alive again. The mention of Sarah no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Emily had learned to speak of her predecessor with respect and gentle curiosity, and Edward had begun sharing memories that were warm rather than only sorrowful. Their friendship deepened through shared meals and long walks across the property. Edward showed her hidden corners of the estate, a stream where kingfishers nested, an old oak tree perfect for climbing, ruins of a medieval chapel covered in ivy. Each revelation felt like a gift, a piece of himself he was choosing to share. "I haven't walked these paths with anyone in years," he admitted one afternoon as they followed a trail through the woods. "It's different, seeing it through someone else's eyes." Emily's pregnancy was becoming more pronounced, and Edward had wordlessly adjusted their activities to accommodate her changing needs. Shorter walks, comfortable chairs strategically placed in the greenhouse, cushions for her back during long gardening sessions. His attentiveness was never overwhelming, just thoughtfully present. Mrs. Fletcher's attitude had gradually thawed from hostility to grudging acceptance to something approaching protectiveness. She began leaving extra blankets in Emily's room, preparing special teas for morning sickness, and quietly taking over the heavier garden tasks. "The girl has a good way with plants," Emily overheard the housekeeper telling Edward one evening, and Lord knows this house needed some life in it again. One particularly beautiful October afternoon, Emily was arranging the season's last roses in the morning room when Edward appeared with an envelope bearing an official seal. "This arrived for you," he said quietly. Emily's hands trembled as she recognized the return address, her university's legal department. With shaking fingers, she opened the letter and read its contents, her face growing pale. "He's filed a complaint against me," she whispered. "Professor Morrison. He's claiming I'm using my pregnancy to harass him, trying to extort money. He wants a restraining order." Edward's face darkened with an anger Emily had never seen before. "He's doing this because he's afraid. Men like that can't bear having their carefully constructed lies exposed. But what if he succeeds? What if they believe him?" Emily sank into a chair, her hands instinctively protective over her belly. "What if he tries to take the baby when she's born?" Edward's expression softened despite his fury. Emily managed a weak smile. "I had a scan in the village last week. Mrs. Fletcher drove me. It's a girl. A daughter." Edward's voice carried wonder, and Emily realized it was probably the first time he'd allowed himself to truly think of her pregnancy in personal terms. "Have you chosen a name?" "Lily," Emily said softly. "After my grandmother, who taught me about gardens." Edward knelt beside her chair, his hands covering hers. "Listen to me carefully. You are not alone in this fight. Morrison has picked the wrong battle with the wrong person. I know excellent solicitors in London, and we're going to make sure his lies don't succeed. Edward, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. More than that, I'm insisting." His blue eyes burned with protective intensity. "Lily deserves better than a father who would rather destroy her mother than take responsibility, and you deserve better than living in fear." That evening, as autumn rain drummed against the windows, they sat before the fireplace in comfortable silence. Edward had already contacted his London solicitor, setting legal wheels in motion. Emily found herself studying his profile in the firelight, overwhelmed by his fierce loyalty to someone he'd known less than a month. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, though she'd asked variations of this question before. This time, Edward's answer was different. "Because somewhere along the way, your fight became my fight too. Because watching you bring life back to Sarah's garden has brought something back to life in me as well." Emily felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. The look in Edward's eyes held something deeper than friendship, warmer than mere protection. "I don't want to be just another broken thing you're trying to fix," she said quietly. Edward reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "You're not broken, Emily. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You've survived abandonment, betrayal, homelessness, and you're still here, still fighting, still creating beauty wherever you go." As if responding to his words, Lily stirred within her, a gentle flutter that made Emily smile. For the first time since learning of her pregnancy, she felt genuine excitement about meeting her daughter. Not fear, not resignation, but joy. Outside, the storm continued, but within the warm circle of firelight, two wounded hearts recognized they might have found something worth fighting for together. November arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself was holding its breath for something momentous. Emily had grown large and uncomfortable, but her spirits remained surprisingly bright. The legal proceedings against Professor Morrison were progressing favorably, thanks to Edward's excellent solicitors, who had uncovered a pattern of harassment involving other students. "I feel like a whale who's forgotten how to swim," Emily complained good-naturedly, as Edward helped her settle into a comfortable chair in the greenhouse. At 8 months pregnant, even her beloved garden work had become challenging. "A very elegant whale," Edward assured her, adjusting cushions behind her back with practiced care. "Dr. Pemberton said everything looks perfect at your last appointment." Emily smiled at his unconscious use of "your appointment." Edward had accompanied her to every medical visit, sitting patiently in waiting rooms and asking thoughtful questions about her care. The village doctor had begun addressing them as a couple, and neither had corrected the assumption. That afternoon, while Edward was in the village collecting supplies, Emily felt the first unmistakable contraction. She was arranging late chrysanthemums in the conservatory when pain seized her middle, sharp and demanding attention. "Oh," she breathed, gripping the table edge. "Oh, that's different." Mrs. Fletcher found her 20 minutes later, timing contractions with determined concentration. "Right then," the housekeeper said briskly, her years of rural life having prepared her for such emergencies. "Let's get you upstairs and call Dr. Pemberton." But Lily had other plans. By the time Edward returned from the village, Emily was in full labor, unable to make the journey to hospital. "Doctor." Pemberton's phone went straight to his answering service. He was attending another birth on the far side of the county. "I can't. This is happening too fast," Emily gasped between contractions, gripping Edward's hand with surprising strength. Edward fought down his panic, drawing on reserves of calm he didn't know he possessed. "Mrs. Fletcher, call the emergency services. Tell them we need an ambulance immediately." "Already done, Mr. Hawthorne. But with this weather turning..." She gestured toward the windows, where rain had begun falling in sheets. "Could be an hour or more." Another contraction seized Emily, stronger than before. Edward found himself swept into the ancient rhythm of birth, following Mrs. Fletcher's surprisingly expert instructions. The housekeeper, it turned out, had helped deliver babies during her youth in rural Scotland. "I can see the head," Mrs. Fletcher announced triumphantly. "One more push, dear heart." Emily bore down with everything she had, and suddenly the room filled with the sharp, healthy cry of new life. Lily Morrison, though Emily had already decided the baby would carry Edward's surname if he agreed, entered the world pink and furious and absolutely perfect. Edward, who had been prepared to faint or flee, instead found himself overwhelmed with fierce protectiveness. When Mrs. Fletcher placed the tiny, slippery bundle in his arms while she tended to Emily, something fundamental shifted in his chest. "Hello, little one," he whispered, amazed by the baby's grip when her tiny fingers closed around his thumb. "Welcome to the world." Emily, exhausted but radiant, watched Edward with Lily and felt her heart complete a transformation that had been months in the making. This man who had saved them both now held her daughter with the reverence of someone who understood exactly how precious this moment was. "She's perfect," Emily breathed, accepting Lily when Edward reluctantly transferred her. "Look at her eyes. They're going to be blue like yours." "Like mine?" Edward's voice caught. "You're the first man she's seen," Emily said softly. "The first voice she heard besides mine. As far as she's concerned, you're her father." The ambulance arrived just as Dr. Pemberton pulled into the drive, both of them far too late, but ready to confirm that mother and daughter were healthy and strong. Lily weighed 7 pounds exactly, with a powerful set of lungs and an imperious demand for attention that made everyone smile. "Rarely seen such a smooth home birth," Dr. Pemberton commented as he completed his examination. "You three make a good team." Later that evening, when official paperwork was complete and Emily and Lily were settled comfortably in the master bedroom at Edward's insistence, they sat together in wonder at the day's events. "I kept thinking about Sarah during the birth," Emily admitted, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Wishing she could be here to see this. I hope she wouldn't mind that Lily was born in her house." Edward's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sarah always said this house was meant for children, that it felt incomplete without young voices in the halls." He stroked Lily's downy head with infinite gentleness. "I think she would be overjoyed." As if responding to her name, Lily's eyes fluttered open, focusing with surprising clarity on Edward's face. She made a small, contented sound that seemed to say she approved of her new circumstances. "She knows you," Emily whispered in amazement. Edward felt his last defenses crumble as he gazed into those bright blue eyes, that seemed far too wise for someone only hours old. Whatever barriers remained around his heart dissolved completely. "Hello, Lily," he said softly. "I'm going to love you for the rest of my life." And in that moment, despite the absence of blood ties or legal documents, Edward Hawthorne became a father in every way that mattered. Outside, the storm that had kept the ambulance away finally cleared, revealing stars that seemed to shine brighter than usual, as if celebrating the newest resident of Hawthorne Farm. Spring arrived early at Hawthorne Farm, bringing with it a contentment that Emily had never imagined possible. Lily, now 4 months old, had settled into a routine of sleeping through the night and charming everyone who met her with her ready smiles and bright blue eyes that had indeed matched Edward's. The legal case against Professor Morrison had been quietly settled out of court, with the university providing Emily a substantial financial settlement and a formal apology. Morrison himself had accepted early retirement rather than face the scandal of multiple harassment allegations coming to light. "Justice served cold, as they say," Edward had commented with satisfaction when their solicitor delivered the news. Emily had used part of the settlement to establish a small fund for Lily's future education, but mostly she found she needed very little. Life at the farm provided everything that mattered: safety, purpose, and a love that had grown gradually from friendship to something deeper and more enduring. She and Edward had not yet spoken the words aloud, but their relationship had evolved into something unmistakably romantic. Stolen glances across the breakfast table, hands that lingered when passing Lily between them, conversations that continued late into the evening before the fireplace. Mrs. Fletcher had long since moved Emily's belongings into the master bedroom, citing practical concerns about nighttime feedings, but fooling no one. "You make him happy," the housekeeper had said simply when Emily tried to maintain the fiction of separate rooms. "And Lord knows that man deserves happiness." On this particular morning, Emily was in the garden with Lily secured in a sling across her chest, planting the summer vegetables that would feed them through the coming months. Edward was in the far field, checking on the sheep with the farm manager. It was a scene of such domestic tranquility that neither of them noticed the expensive sedan that turned into their drive. The knock on the front door sent Mrs. Fletcher muttering about unexpected visitors. Emily, hearing raised voices from inside the house, secured Lily more firmly and went to investigate. She found a well-dressed man in his 50s standing in their front hall, flanked by an equally formal woman with a briefcase. Mrs. Fletcher hovered nearby, her expression thunderous. "I told them you weren't receiving visitors," the housekeeper said tightly, "but they insist it's a legal matter." Emily's blood ran cold as recognition hit her. Professor Morrison. James Morrison looked older than when she'd last seen him, his face bearing the lines of someone who'd spent months under scrutiny and stress. But his eyes held the same arrogance that had first attracted and then destroyed her. "Hello, Emily. You're looking, well," his gaze fixed on Lily with an intensity that made Emily's arms tighten protectively around her daughter. "And this must be my child. What do you want?" Emily's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The woman with the briefcase stepped forward. "I'm Janet Whitmore, Mr. Morrison's solicitor. We're here regarding custody arrangements for the minor child." Emily felt the world tilt dangerously. Custody arrangements? "Mr. Morrison is prepared to acknowledge paternity and assume full custody of the child," the solicitor continued in a crisp, professional tone. "He's recently remarried and can provide a stable two-parent home environment." Morrison spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same professorial authority that had once impressed Emily. "I've made mistakes, I'll admit that, but I've since gotten my life in order. My wife is eager to be a mother, and we can offer Lily opportunities that a single mother living on charity simply cannot." The casual cruelty of the words hit Emily like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Edward's voice cut through the tension like a blade. I'm sorry, but who exactly are you? He stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, but commanding immediate attention. His blue eyes were ice cold as they fixed on Morrison. I'm the child's biological father, Morrison replied with obvious discomfort under Edward's steady gaze. And you are? Edward Hawthorne. This is my home where Emily and Lily live under my protection. Each word was precisely enunciated, carrying unmistakable threat. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The solicitor stepped forward again. Mr. Hawthorne, while we appreciate your generosity toward Miss Carter, the law is quite clear about biological father's rights. Mr. Morrison is prepared to provide full financial support, and the law is also quite clear about abandonment, Edward interrupted smoothly. A man who throws a pregnant woman out of her home, threatens her academically and professionally, and then disappears for the better part of a year, has precious little legal standing to claim paternal rights. Emily found her voice at last. You can't have her. You made your choice when you called me a liar and a manipulator, when you had me thrown out of housing, when you left me homeless and alone. Morrison's composure cracked slightly. I was protecting my marriage, my career. Surely you can understand. I understand that you're a coward, Emily said quietly. And cowards don't get to suddenly decide they want to be fathers when it's convenient. Lily, perhaps sensing the tension in the room, began to fuss softly. Emily automatically swayed to comfort her, the motion natural and practiced. Morrison watched the interaction with something that might have been longing, but Emily felt only revulsion. We'll be in touch through proper legal channels, the solicitor said stiffly. Mr. Morrison has rights regardless of past misunderstandings. After they left, Emily sank into a chair. Lily clutched against her chest. The terror she thought she'd conquered came flooding back, threatening to drown her in its intensity. He can't take her, she whispered. Edward, please tell me he can't take her. Edward knelt beside her chair, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. He won't take her. I promise you that. But what if the courts will see a man who abandoned his responsibilities trying to capitalize on someone else's love and sacrifice? Edward's voice carried absolute conviction. They'll see that Lily has thrived here, that she's loved and wanted and safe. That evening, as they sat in their solicitor's office in London, Emily felt some of her panic begin to recede. Mr. Jameson was a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who had handled the Morrison harassment case with ruthless efficiency. Fathers' rights have limits, he assured them, particularly when the father in question actively rejected those rights for months. Morrison's case is weak legally, but we should prepare for a fight. He wouldn't have come unless he thought he had some advantage. As they drove home through the darkening countryside, Lily sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Emily tried to imagine life without her daughter and found it literally unthinkable. Whatever happens, Edward said quietly, we face it together, all three of us. Emily reached for his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. The battle ahead would test everything they'd built together, but for the first time since Morrison's appearance, she believed they might actually win. The family court in Oxford was a modern building that somehow managed to feel both sterile and oppressive. Emily sat between Edward and their solicitor, Mr. Jameson, trying to keep her hands from shaking as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Lily, now 6 months old and increasingly active, was being cared for by Mrs. Fletcher back at the farm, though Emily's arms felt empty without her daughter's warm weight. Professor Morrison sat across the aisle with his legal team and his new wife, a polished woman who looked to be in her early 40s, with the kind of professional composure Emily had once aspired to achieve. They made an impressive couple, exactly the sort of stable, upper-middle-class family that courts traditionally favored. Remember, Mr. Jameson murmured quietly, truth is on our side. Stay calm, answer directly, and let the evidence speak. Judge Patricia Henley entered with the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen every variation of family dispute imaginable. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and keen eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Morrison's solicitor presented their case first, painting a picture of a reformed man who had made youthful mistakes but was now ready to embrace his responsibilities as a father. They emphasized his stable marriage, his substantial income, and his ability to provide educational opportunities that Emily could never match. "My client deeply regrets his initial reaction to the pregnancy," the solicitor argued smoothly. "But he was in a difficult position, trying to preserve his marriage while processing unexpected news. Now, with his personal life stabilized, he's prepared to offer his daughter the benefits of a traditional two-parent household." Emily listened with growing incredulity as Morrison took the stand and delivered what sounded like a carefully rehearsed performance. He spoke of sleepless nights worrying about his daughter, of wanting to be part of her life, of the guilt that had consumed him for months. "I know I handled the situation poorly initially," he said, his voice carrying practiced remorse. "But I've learned from my mistakes. My wife and I have prepared a nursery, enrolled in parenting classes, and we're ready to provide Lily with everything she needs." When cross-examined by Mr. Jameson, however, Morrison's carefully constructed narrative began to show cracks. "Mr. Morrison, you testified that you've worried about your daughter for months, yet you made no attempt to contact Miss Carter during her pregnancy, correct?" The situation was complicated. Complicated enough that you had Miss Carter removed from university housing while she was 7 months pregnant." Morrison's jaw tightened. "That was a university decision, not mine. A decision made after you filed a complaint claiming she was harassing you. I felt threatened by her demands for support." Mr. Jameson's voice remained perfectly neutral. "What demands were those, specifically?" She wanted me to leave my wife, to acknowledge the child publicly. According to Miss Carter's testimony, she asked only that you not interfere with her studies and that you consider some financial assistance for medical expenses. Are you saying she explicitly asked you to leave your wife?" Morrison faltered, realizing he'd contradicted his own earlier statement. "The situation was emotionally charged. Perhaps I misunderstood her intentions." When Emily took the stand, she felt every eye in the courtroom upon her. Judge Henley's expression was unreadable as Emily recounted the early days of her relationship with Morrison, the shock of discovering his marriage, and the devastating aftermath of revealing her pregnancy. "He didn't just abandon me," Emily said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "He actively worked to destroy my life. When I lost my housing, I had nowhere to go. I was sleeping in parks, begging for food. If Mr. Hawthorne hadn't found me that night—" She paused, composing herself. "I nearly died of exposure. My daughter nearly died." Morrison's solicitor attempted to paint Emily as vindictive and unstable during cross-examination, but her calm responses and evident love for Lily undermined every attack. "Miss Carter, isn't it true that you're living off Mr. Hawthorne's charity? That you have no independent means of support?" "I contribute to the household through managing the gardens and helping with farm administration. But yes, Edward has provided me with security when no one else would." "And you don't think it's in Lily's best interests to be with her biological father who can provide for her independently?" Emily met Morrison's eyes across the courtroom before answering. "Lily's best interests lie with people who love her unconditionally, who wanted her from the moment they knew of her existence, and who will never make her feel like a burden or a mistake." Edward's testimony was the turning point. His quiet dignity and obvious devotion to both Emily and Lily created a powerful impression. When Morrison's solicitor tried to suggest that Edward was merely a temporary fixture in their lives, Edward's response was devastating in its simplicity. "I love that little girl as if she were my own blood," he said steadily. "I was there when she was born. I've walked the floor with her during sleepless nights, celebrated her first smile, worried through her first fever. Love isn't about genetics. It's about choice, commitment, and showing up every single day. The character witnesses told their own story. Dr. Pemberton testified about Emily's devoted care during pregnancy and after birth. Mrs. Fletcher, formidable in her best dress, spoke of watching Emily blossom from a frightened girl into a confident mother. The village postmaster mentioned how Emily had become part of the community, helping with the church garden and organizing fundraisers. Morrison's side offered professional references and financial statements, but no one who could speak to his relationship with Lily or his day-to-day commitment to fatherhood. Judge Henley recessed for 2 hours before returning with her decision. The courtroom was silent, except for the rustling of papers as she arranged her notes. This case presents the court with competing claims about what constitutes the best interests of a 6-month-old child, she began. On one side, we have a biological father who, despite initial failures, now claims readiness to accept parental responsibility. On the other, we have a mother who has demonstrated consistent love and care, supported by a partner who has voluntarily assumed parental duties. Emily's heart hammered as the judge continued. The court notes that Mr. Morrison's newfound interest in fatherhood coincides conveniently with Miss Carter's improved circumstances. His actions during Miss Carter's pregnancy, including having her removed from housing and threatening her academic standing, demonstrate a fundamental failure to accept responsibility when it was most needed. Morrison's face grew pale as the judge's words continued. Furthermore, the evidence shows that Lily has thrived in her current environment. She is healthy, loved, and surrounded by stability. Mr. Hawthorne's voluntary assumption of parental duties without legal obligation demonstrates a commitment that speaks volumes about his character and his bond with this child. Judge Henley looked directly at Morrison. Biological connection does not automatically confer parental rights when those rights have been effectively abandoned. The court finds that Mr. Morrison forfeited his claim to immediate custody through his actions and inactions over the past year. Emily felt tears streaming down her face as relief flooded through her. Custody of Lily Carter remains with her mother, Emily Carter. Mr. Morrison is granted supervised visitation rights, should he choose to exercise them, beginning with 2 hours per month. These visits will be reviewed after 6 months to determine if expanded access is in the child's best interests. As they left the courthouse, Emily felt as if she could breathe fully for the first time in months. Edward's arm around her shoulders was warm and solid, anchoring her to this new reality where Lily was safe. "It's over," she whispered, scarcely believing it. "It's over," Edward agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And we won." Behind them, Morrison and his legal team were already planning their exit strategy, apparently unwilling to fight for even the limited visitation rights they'd been granted. Emily felt a moment of sadness for Lily, who would grow up knowing her biological father had chosen pride over love, but it was overwhelmed by gratitude for the man who had chosen them both without hesitation. As they drove home through the golden afternoon light, Emily allowed herself to fully embrace the future that stretched ahead of them, uncertain in its details perhaps, but grounded in a love that had proven itself strong enough to weather any storm. The weeks following the custody hearing brought a peace to Hawthorne Farm that felt different from before, deeper, more permanent. Emily found herself moving through her days with a lightness she hadn't experienced since childhood, as if some fundamental weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Lily, blissfully unaware of the legal battles that had raged around her, continued to grow and develop with the serene confidence of a much-loved child. At 7 months, she was sitting up reliably, babbling constantly, and had developed a particular fascination with Edward's deep voice that made him melt every time she turned toward him with her bright smile. "She definitely knows who her daddy is," Mrs. Fletcher observed one morning, watching Lily's face light up as Edward's footsteps approached the kitchen. Emily felt her heart skip at the casual use of the word "daddy." Though they'd never formally discussed it, Edward had naturally assumed the role in every way that mattered. He was the one who got up for middle-of-the-night feedings, who sang ridiculous songs during diaper changes, who could calm Lily's fussing with a gentle word or touch. That evening, after Lily had been settled for the night, Emily found Edward in his study, staring out the window at the gardens she had transformed over the past months. The cutting beds were in full summer glory now, providing fresh flowers for every room in the house. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she said softly, settling into the chair beside his desk. Edward turned to her with a smile that still made her pulse quicken after all these months. "I was thinking about time. How strange it is that a year ago I was living in this house alone, convinced that was how things would always be. And now, you're stuck with a ready-made family you never asked for," Emily finished lightly, though her eyes searched his face for any sign of regret. "Now I have everything I never dared to hope for," Edward corrected gently. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said months ago." Emily's stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. "What is it?" Edward rose from his chair and moved to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his larger ones. "I love you. Not just as a friend, not just because you needed rescuing, but because you've become the most important person in my world. You and Lily both." The words she'd been hoping to hear for months washed over her like warm sunlight. "Edward, I know this isn't how these things usually happen," he continued, his voice slightly unsteady. "I know you didn't choose to be here initially, and I don't want you to feel obligated to stay just because I've helped you. But if there's any chance that you could see a future here, with me—" Emily silenced him by placing her fingers gently over his lips. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I have for months, but I was afraid to believe it was real." Edward's eyes closed briefly, as if absorbing the relief of her words. When he opened them again, they were bright, with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I was certain that part of my life was over. But you've shown me that love doesn't replace love. It expands it. I can love Sarah's memory and love you completely at the same time." Emily understood exactly what he meant. Her feelings for Edward hadn't erased the pain Morrison had caused, but they had transformed it into something that made her stronger rather than weaker. "What are you asking me, Edward?" she said softly, though she thought she knew. Edward reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small velvet box that made Emily's breath catch. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, if you'll let me adopt Lily legally and give her my name, if you'll help me turn this house into the family home Sarah always dreamed it could be." Emily opened the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that caught the lamplight like captured stars. "It was my grandmother's," Edward explained. "Sarah chose her own ring when we married, but she always loved this one. She said someday it would find the right woman." Emily's hands trembled as she lifted the ring from its velvet nest. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, to all of it, to marriage, to adoption, to making this house full of the life and love it deserves." Edward pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of months of restrained feeling, finally allowed free rein. When they broke apart, both were breathless and grinning like teenagers. "Should we go tell Lily the news?" Emily suggested, laughing at her own foolishness. "Not that she'll understand, but she'll understand that her parents are happy," Edward said, and the casual use of parents made Emily's heart soar. "That's enough for now." They found Lily awake in her crib, apparently having sensed the momentous nature of the evening. She gurgled happily as Edward lifted her, her tiny hands immediately reaching for Emily's hair. "Hello, sweetheart," Emily murmured, accepting Lily from Edward's arms. "Guess what? Edward is going to be your official daddy, and I'm going to be Mrs. Hawthorne." Lily responded with a stream of delighted babbling that they chose to interpret as approval. Later that night, as they sat before the fireplace with Lily sleeping peacefully between them, Emily marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been homeless, pregnant, and abandoned. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her unconditionally, surrounded by the security of a real home and planning a future that seemed bright with possibility. "When should we have the wedding?" Edward asked, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her arm. "Soon," Emily said without hesitation. "I've waited long enough for my real life to begin. I don't want to wait any longer." "Mrs. Fletcher will want to plan everything," Edward warned with a smile. "She's been dropping hints about weddings since the day you arrived." "Let her," Emily laughed. "After everything she's done for us, she deserves to plan the wedding of her dreams." As the fire burned low and Lily's breathing remained peaceful and steady, Emily allowed herself to fully embrace the miracle of her circumstances. She had found not just love, but home in its truest sense, a place where she was valued, protected, and free to become the best version of herself. Outside, the gardens she had planted rustled softly in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called from the ancient oak trees. It was the sound of home, of belonging, of a future that stretched ahead of them, filled with ordinary days made extraordinary by love. 1 year later, the October sun filtered through the conservatory windows, casting dancing patterns of light across the flagstone floor, where Lily Rose Hawthorne took her determined first steps. At 15 months old, she had inherited her mother's stubborn streak and her father's quiet confidence, a combination that promised interesting years ahead. "Come on, sweetheart," Emily encouraged, kneeling with arms outstretched. "Come to Mama." Lily wobbled for a moment, her chubby hands extended for balance, then took 3 triumphant steps before collapsing into Emily's waiting embrace with delighted giggles. "Well done," Edward's voice carried across the conservatory as he entered with a tea tray, his daily ritual during Emily's afternoon break from the expanded gardens. "Our daughter is going to be running circles around us by Christmas." "Our daughter," Emily repeated softly, the phrase still filling her with wonder, even after 6 months of marriage and legal adoption papers. Lily would never remember a time when Edward wasn't her father, which was exactly as it should be. The conservatory had become the heart of their home, where Emily worked on her botanical illustrations during Lily's naps, and where the family gathered for quiet moments. Emily's artwork, inspired by the flowers she'd cultivated, had begun selling in galleries in London and Oxford. The income wasn't substantial, but it represented something precious, the resurrection of dreams she'd thought lost forever. "Mrs. Patterson from the village called," Edward said, settling beside Emily on the comfortable sofa they'd chosen together. "She wants to commission a watercolor series of her rose garden for her daughter's wedding gift." Emily smiled, remembering her own wedding 6 months earlier. Mrs. Fletcher had indeed orchestrated everything, transforming the house and gardens into a fairy tale setting. The ceremony had been small but perfect. Just close friends, the vicar, and Lily in a tiny pink dress, babbling happily throughout the vows. Morrison had never exercised his court-mandated visitation rights. After the first missed appointment, his solicitor had quietly filed papers terminating his parental rights entirely, clearing the way for Edward's adoption. Emily felt no bitterness about his absence, only gratitude that Lily would grow up knowing she was wholly wanted and loved. "I've been thinking," Edward said, his tone casual in the way that usually meant he'd been planning something significant, "about expanding the gardens next year. Perhaps a children's play area near the old apple trees. Lily will need space to run and climb." Emily's heart skipped as she caught the implication in his words. "Edward Hawthorne, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that this house has many empty bedrooms, and we're both young enough to fill a few more of them." if you're amenable to the idea." Emily looked down at Lily, who had discovered her own feet and was conducting a serious examination of her tiny shoes. The thought of more children, brothers and sisters for Lily to grow up with, filled her with joy. "How many are we talking about?" she asked with mock seriousness. "Oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 more, maybe 5. Edward's eyes danced with mischief. "Mrs. Fletcher has already started converting the old nursery wing just in case." "Has she indeed?" Emily laughed, not surprised that the housekeeper was already 3 steps ahead of them. "And what makes you think I want to spend the next few years pregnant?" Edward's response was to pull her closer and kiss her temples softly. "Because I've seen you with Lily. Because I know how much love you have to give. And because I've dreamed of this house filled with children's laughter since the night you first arrived." Emily leaned into his warmth, watching Lily attempt to crawl up onto the sofa to join them. Life had taught her not to take happiness for granted, but it had also shown her that love could transform even the darkest circumstances into something beautiful. 3, she said decisively. 3 more would be perfect. 2 boys and a girl if we're taking requests. "I'll see what I can arrange," Edward replied gravely, then broke into the grin that never failed to make her heart flutter. Outside the conservatory, the gardens displayed the full glory of autumn. The beds Emily had planted in those first tentative weeks had matured into abundant displays of colour and texture. The cutting garden provided fresh flowers year-round. The herb garden supplied Mrs. Fletcher's increasingly ambitious cooking experiments, and the vegetable plots kept their table supplied with fresh produce. But it was more than just the plants that had flourished. The entire property hummed with life and purpose in a way it hadn't for years. Edward had hired 2 additional gardeners to help maintain Emily's expanded designs, and they'd converted one of the outbuildings into a proper studio for her artwork. "Do you ever miss it?" Emily asked, voicing a question that had been in her mind lately. "The quiet life you had before we invaded your peace." Edward considered this seriously, as he did all her questions. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," he admitted, "but I wouldn't trade the complexity for anything. Peace without purpose is just loneliness in disguise." Lily had successfully climbed onto the sofa and was now attempting to distribute herself equally between both parents, patting Emily's face with one hand while grabbing Edward's shirt with the other. "Mama," she said clearly, one of her few reliable words. Then, turning to Edward with a brilliant smile, "Dada." Just the simple words, spoken with such confidence and love, encapsulated everything they had built together. Emily had arrived at Hawthorne Farm broken and desperate, carrying a child conceived in betrayal. But love had transformed both betrayal and desperation into something stronger and more beautiful than either she or Edward could have created alone. "I love you," Emily said softly, the words carrying the weight of all their shared experiences, the fear and uncertainty of the early days, the joy of Lily's birth, the triumph of the custody battle, and the quiet daily happiness of their married life. "And I love you," Edward replied, his arm tightening around both his girls. "Both of you. Always." Erda's afternoon faded into evening. They remained in their comfortable huddle, making plans for the future while enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Lily dozed between them, secure in the love that surrounded her from every side. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now resonated with laughter, conversation, and the countless small sounds of a thriving family. Mrs. Fletcher's humming from the kitchen, the distant sound of the gardeners finishing their day's work, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, all of it combined into a symphony of home. Emily's first glimpse of Hawthorne Farm had been through rain-soaked windows on one of the darkest nights of her life. Now, watching golden sunlight paint the familiar rooms with warmth, she marveled at how far they had all traveled. The scared, pregnant girl who had stumbled into Edward's life had grown into a confident woman, wife, and mother. The lonely widower had rediscovered his capacity for joy and love. And Lily, who had begun life as an unwanted complication, had become the center around which their entire world turned, not a burden to be borne, but a gift to be treasured. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and Emily knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Love had found them in the most unlikely circumstances and had proven itself strong enough to build a future on. This was where new beginnings lived, not in grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but in the daily choice to tend carefully what had been planted, to nurture what was growing, and to trust that love, like the most resilient flowers, could bloom even in the most unexpected soil. The rest of their story was still being written, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. What did you think of Emily and Edward's incredible journey from strangers to soulmates? This heartwarming tale of between silences and flowers shows us that sometimes our greatest challenges can lead to our most beautiful blessings. From that fateful rainy night in London to the blossoming love at Hawthorne Farm, we witness how two broken hearts can heal together and create something extraordinary. Emily's transformation from a desperate, homeless pregnant woman to a confident wife and mother, alongside Edward's journey from lonely widower to devoted father, proves that love truly can bloom in the most unexpected places. If this touching story of second chances and found family moved your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who believes in the power of love to transform lives. Your support helps us bring more beautiful stories like this to readers around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest romantic tales of hope, healing, and happily ever afters. We'd love to connect with our global community of romance lovers. Please tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? Whether you're curled up with a cup of tea in England, enjoying coffee in Brazil, or reading under the stars in Australia, we want to hear from you.